My father called me on a Tuesday afternoon. I remember exactly where I was, sitting in my car in a parking lot, eating a sandwich before my next shift. I hadn't spoken to him in almost 4 months. So when his name appeared on my screen, my stomach dropped. I almost didn't answer, but I did. And the first words out of his mouth weren't "How are you?" or "I miss you," or even just "Hello." The first words he said were, "I need $1,000, send it today." No explanation. No warmth, no apology for the silence, just a demand, like I was a banky. Could call whenever he needed a withdrawal. I sat there in that parking lot for a long moment, staring out the windshield at nothing, and then I made a decision that I thought was petty in the moment, a small act of quiet rebellion, but turned out to be the most important thing I have ever done for myself and for my family. I sent him $10. And that $10 changed everything. To understand why that phone call hit the way it did, you need to understand who my father was, or rather, who he had always been to me. He was not a bad man in the way movies portray bad fathers. He wasn't violent. He wasn't absent in the physical sense. He was there at the dinner table, at school events, at family gatherings, but emotionally, he was somewhere else entirely. He was the kind of man who believed that providing financially meant he had done his job as a parent, food on the table, roof over our heads. In his mind, that was love. And everything else, the encouragement, the warmth, the conversations, the presence, those things were weaknesses he had no time for. Growing up, I learned very quickly that his approval was a currency I could never quite earn. I'd bring home good grades, and he'd ask why they weren't perfect. I'd win an award and he'd tell me not to get too proud. I got into a good university and he told me to make sure I didn't waste his money. Everything was transactional. Everything had a condition attached to it. And as I got older, as I built my own life, paid my own bills, and started to understand what real love actually looks like, I started pulling back. Not dramatically, not with a big confrontation. Just quietly, gradually, creating distance between myself and the weight of his expectations. By the time that Tuesday phone call came, 4 months of silence had passed between us, and I hadn't even felt its absence. Did you grow up with a parent whose love felt conditional? Comment yes or nitrogen monoxide below. So when he called that Tuesday, I answered and he asked for $1,000. I asked him what it was for. He said it wasn't my business. I asked if everything was okay. He said he just needed the money and I should send it. No please, no context, no acknowledgement that 4 months had passed since we'd last spoken, or that the last time we spoke, it had ended in an argument about, of all things, whether I was living my life the right way. I remember feeling something shift inside me as I sat in that car. Not anger exactly, more like clarity. Because in that moment, I realized something I had been circling around for years without being able to name it. My father did not see me as a son. He saw me as a resource, and every time I had sent money before, every time I had wired funds, without question, picked up the tab, covered expenses, I was never asked if I could afford. I had been reinforcing that belief. I had been teaching him, again and again, that I was available to be used. And he had learned the lesson well. I opened my banking app. I went to the transfer screen. I typed in his account number. I had it memorized from all the previous times, and instead of typing 1,000, I typed $10, and I hit send. Then I finished my sandwich, started my car, and drove to work. Have you ever sent a symbolic response to someone who took you for granted? Tell me in the comments. He called back within 4 minutes. I didn't answer. He called again. I let it ring, then the texts started coming. First confused, did you send the wrong amount? Then frustrated, this is not funny, send the rest. Then angry, messages I won't repeat word for word, but the tone was one I recognized from childhood. The tone that was designed to make me feel small. The tone that said, how dare you? I read every message. I didn't reply to a single one, not because I was trying to be cruel, but because, for the first time in my adult life, I genuinely did not feel the pull to fix it. That familiar panic that used to rise in my chest whenever he was displeased, it wasn't there. I sat with that absence and I almost didn't know what to do with it. That evening, my mother called. She was calm, measured. She always was the mediator. She asked me what had happened, and I told her the truth. I told her he'd called asking for $1,000 with no explanation, and I'd sent 10. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said something I will never forget. She said, I think part of me has been waiting for one of you to do this for 30 years. My mother had spent 30 years managing my father. That's the only word for it, managing, softening his edges for the rest of us, translating his coldness into something livable, apologizing on his behalf without ever calling it an apology. She had built her entire emotional life around keeping the peace in that house, and it had cost her things she never talked about, dreams she had quietly folded up and put away, friendships she had let go. Because he didn't approve a version of herself she had slowly stopped being. She didn't say all of this on the phone that night. She didn't have to. I had watched it happen my whole childhood. But that night, something in her voice was different. She sounded lighter. Like a window had been opened in a room that had been sealed shut for a very long time. She told me that my father had been lending money to a relative, someone I barely knew, and had lost a significant amount. He was embarrassed. He couldn't tell her. So he had called me, the child most likely to comply without asking questions, because that had always worked before. And it would have worked again if I hadn't sent $10 instead. Did your mother ever sacrifice her own happiness to keep family peace? Comment below. This one hits different. 3 days after the texts, my father called again. This time, his voice was different. The anger was gone. What replaced it wasn't warmth exactly. My father didn't do warmth, but it was something I had never heard from him before. It was smallness. He sounded small. He asked me why I had done it. And I told him the truth, not harshly, not dramatically, but clearly. I told him that I had sent $10 because that is how much I felt our relationship was worth in that moment. Not because I didn't love him, but because love without respect isn't love, it's just obligation. And I was done confusing the two. He didn't respond immediately. The silence stretched out so long I thought he'd hung up. Then he said, I don't know how to do this differently. I only know how to provide, and in that sentence, 9 words, I heard something I had never heard from my father in 30 years of life. I heard him admit that he was limited, that he knew something was broken, that he didn't have all the answers. It wasn't an apology, but it was the closest thing to vulnerability I had ever witnessed from him, and I didn't know whether to feel relieved or devastated, so I felt both at once. Have you ever had a parent finally admit, even indirectly, that they got something wrong? What did that feel like? That phone call did not fix my father. I want to be clear about that because this is not that kind of story. He did not transform overnight. He did not suddenly become emotionally available or shower me with the validation I had spent years quietly longing for. What changed was me. After that conversation, I stopped waiting. I stopped holding a space inside myself for a version of my father that was never going to arrive. I stopped performing the role of the dutiful child who accepts whatever is given and asks for nothing in return. I started setting boundaries, not as punishment, but as self-preservation. I started saying no when I meant no. I started conversations about things that mattered to me, and when he deflected or went cold, I didn't chase the warmth. I let him be who he was, and I let myself be who I was too. Something unexpected happened as a result of all this. My younger brother, who had been watching from a distance, called me about 2 weeks later. He said he'd heard what happened. He said he'd been carrying the same exhaustion for years and hadn't known he was allowed to put it down. We talked for 3 hours that night. We talked about things we had never said out loud to each other, about growing up in that house, about the weight of his expectations, about the ways we had each coped and each suffered. That conversation began a friendship between us that I hadn't known was possible. We had grown up in the same house and somehow never truly known each other. $10 built that bridge. Has a difficult family moment ever unexpectedly brought you closer to a sibling or relative? Share your story below. My father and I still talk. It's not frequent and it's not deep, but it is honest in a way it never was before. He knows now that I will not be summoned. He knows that my time and my money and my energy are things I give freely, not things he can demand. And somehow, knowing that, having the boundary made clear, seems to have given him a kind of respect for me he never showed when I was compliant. I don't know if he will ever be the father I needed when I was young. I've made peace with the fact that he probably won't. But I know who I am now. I know what I will and will not accept. I know that love is not proven by how much you sacrifice. It is proven by how much you see each other. And I know that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do in a relationship that has been taken from you for years is send $10. Not to hurt someone, not to make a point, but to finally, quietly tell the truth. Do you think I made the right decision? Or should I have handled it differently? Be honest. I can take it. If this story resonated with you, comment the word "seen" below. You are not alone.